The end goal of these programs that, whether it's a racing team or these sort of like community ambassador programs, the end goal of them should not be sales. It should be to build a relationship.
I became aware of the company in probably the summer of 2012. I had just graduated college and I was interning to start at Energy Bits, and we had brand partnerships and mutual ambassadors and showed up at events together. And Nuun was early stage, but Energy Bits was early stage. And it was really cool to see the beginnings. And I mean, honestly, we modeled a lot of what seemed to be working for Nuun in how we operated, right? It was community first. It was find evangelists and influencers. And in 2012, like, the influencer approach was novel. And, Lori Wysotsky would post, I'm sure you remember that name, would like post a thing online with a discount code to her 800 followers and 50 people would buy. And it was like the conversion was crazy because it was such a high trust environment. And Lori was a mom and runner in Florida, if I recall. And like, she ran fast, but she wasn't a pro. She didn't have a huge following. And it was just like, this was a model that worked. It was like, find people who trust and believe in the product. And I think we're kind of like coming back around to that. And we've, over the last couple of years, seen such an explosion of brand deals and sponsorship and athlete sponsorship, influencer sponsorship and whatnot. And it's just like, we've started to cut through the noise and see like what's bullshit and what is just a paid ad. But it was so fun in those early days of like such a high trust experience because nobody else was doing it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think Nuun, Energy Bits, Oiselle as well, we're all, and the other brands in there too, though there weren't that many that were playing this way, were really before their time in terms of how they thought about building community. One of the things that I would always say at Nuun, and now it's fun that I'm at Oiselle and I get to say it again because I still believe it, is these programs, like the end goal of these programs that, whether it's a racing team or these sort of like community ambassador programs, the end goal of them should not be sales. It should be to build a relationship. And so, one of the things that we did at Nuun through that whole decade, and I feel grateful that I had leadership that believed in this strategy, was like, we show up as ourselves. They don't have a relationship with Nuun. They have a relationship with Kevin. They have a relationship with me. They have a relationship with Brian or Mason or Brittany or whoever's running the program. Like, having individuals know each other as individuals builds a significantly deeper relationship. And that really is what it's about, because as a mission-driven brand, yeah, it's a business. Like, you've got to, hit sales goals and be profitable. Otherwise, the business will cease to exist. But that doesn't mean that that's, at the end of the day, the only thing that you're trying to achieve. And both Nuun and Oiselle, are two brands that are very, very mission-driven. And so those relationships are what helps bring the mission to life.
There are a handful of brands that come to mind when you think about like who personifies the brand. And it's the like building in public, it's the building for people, with people, and like being so in it and in the community. And it's the kind of thing that it's like, it's hard to measure ROI, but if you have the right executive leadership that believes that this is the right way to do it, you kind of just trust that it works. Was the leadership at Nuun and Oiselle, was it always of that ilk? Like, let's be people first and the results will follow, right? You said that, the goal is to build community for community's sake and not for sales, but you also said that if you don't have the sales, the company ceases to exist. So like, how do you walk that very fine line of let's be people first and lead with community and focus on community? Like, I just had a conversation with Ross Rutherford of Cherubundy, and Ross, you think of Cherubundy, you think of Ross. You think of this guy running laps around Manhattan, like eating cherry juice. And that's like the perfect epitome of somebody who personifies the brand. So how do you balance those two conflicting statements while both can be true at the same time?
It's hard. And look, no one's doing it perfectly. There are times at Nuun and Oiselle and any brand that chooses to invest in this type of community building, there's times where you're not activating enough, or you're letting your community down, or your community wishes that you were doing it different, or sales slip and you have to focus your attention on something else for a bit of time. That's just the reality. It's an art, not a science, to balance it and build it. But the reality is also that consumers are very, very mission and values driven, especially in the outdoor industry, especially in the running industry. And so by building relationships, it keeps brands top of mind. And so it doesn't have to be about sell, 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 product, product, product. It's if there's a relationship and a mutual appreciation, and, those community members who are also customers really appreciate the brand for what it stands for, how it operates, what it does, like what have you, then they are more likely to choose to spend their dollars with a brand that is behaving that way over a brand that is transactional or incredibly commercial in how they go to market.
Jumping ahead to your time at Oiselle, because I think that the answer to this question will illustrate this quite perfectly if you're open to sharing, and stop me if we shouldn't. But I became privy to some of the metrics around the Volée program. Can I continue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And the lifetime value and average order value of a Volée member was about 3 times higher than the average customer. So here's someone who is a paying member of your community. They love, they're an evangelist, etc. And they are quote unquote worth 3 times as a customer. Can you talk about the impact of something like that and putting objective metrics behind the feel-good statements that we were discussing previously?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so the way that I look at that here at Oiselle, and the way that I have the team look at it, is we're not looking at, our community as like a KPI, if that makes sense. So we're not looking at that community and saying, here are the sales KPIs or the LTV KPIs or KPIs around that community of humans. We're focused on that community of humans to improve the sport of running, to make it more accessible, to be more inclusive, and to just like change lives for the better. But it speaks to the power of loyalty. Undoubtedly, it speaks to the power of loyalty. So, our focus there is like, wow, we need to build more relationships. If relationships have that kind of positive impact on our business, then we're not in the business of commercializing the relationships. We're in the business of like building more of the relationships. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but it's a little bit of framework in terms of how we think about our different audiences and what like that value of loyalty is.
What would happen though if there was no difference in that, or maybe they were spending less on an annual basis? Would that framework still hold true?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't think that that's a possible universe. If that were to happen, then the brand is doing something wrong.
Something's broken.
Yeah, then like the brand has changed so much. We've got bigger problems.
Right.
If that's what the trend that we're seeing. Pretty universally, brands who are mission and values driven and do spend that time connecting, the reason that our runner cares about Oiselle is because we have shared values. And so for things to swing in that direction, I think Oiselle's values would really, really have to change. And then there's more questions. So,
and that's a good signal.
Yeah.
Or a bad signal, but it's a signal if that were to be true. Okay, so you end up becoming vice president of marketing in January of 2019. What did the trajectory through or up the chain look like for you? And 10 years is a long time. I just wrapped up 10 and a half years at Insight Tracker, and like nobody is at brands for 10 years, like a decade. Why did you stay for so long?
I stayed because every time I thought about leaving, something would change that I wanted to see through. I wanted to like see that through, or like the next stage feels close. I want to learn that. And my trajectory in terms of what I had exposure to, what I learned, what I had the opportunity to be a part of changed like so dramatically over that decade. And I think that something that was really valuable to me just in terms of my leadership style and how I learn is because I was at the same company and the same brand, no matter how much things changed, there were some pieces of the puzzle that still stayed the same. The brand was the same. The product was the same. The customer, everything changes over time, but was the same. Most of our executive team stayed in place for the majority of that time. Some of them joined a little bit later. And so there was just like an extreme amount of trust that we built working together for so long that when there was something to learn or overcome, I mean, maybe I should have been afraid, but I was like never afraid to fail. I'd never found an environment that felt that supportive, yet also growth oriented in my career up until that point. So I think that was, looking back and reflecting, that was a really formative experience for me, going from just smaller team, not having had a ton of leadership experience, to really building and growing a powerful brand and just a kick-ass team.
A word you used a couple of times in that explanation was trust. Anyone who knows Kevin Rutherford, trust, loyalty, amazing human, those are the words that describe him. Did it really start from him? Was it like that was just the vibe of the executive team? Like, how do you create that environment where you are not afraid to fail? And in fact, failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it, right? Like my previous CEO at Inside Tracker, Ronnie, would tell me all the time, like, we need to fail faster sometimes. And like that type of experimentation was not just suggested, but like requested and encouraged. I'm in a position now where I'm doing some consulting work for a company called Eternal, and they're sponsoring this podcast actually. And it's the same thing. And then some, even. It's like, let's trust each other enough that we can make mistakes and learn from them. So like, how do you create that?
It's another art, not science, but certainly at Nuun, that was something. And I believe this to be true at most organizations that do that effectively. Like, it's from the top down. The reality is that, even if you're part of a small team and you try to make it flat, leaders impact the culture and the vibe and the how we work tremendously. And everyone looks to leaders and those in leadership positions to set the tone, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. And Kevin, absolutely. Before he stepped in, I will say the culture at Nuun was different. It wasn't like crazy, crazy different, but it was less trusting. It was less open. There wasn't like fear of failure, but there also wasn't any focus on growth or improvement. When he stepped in and the team was small, to give him a tremendous amount of credit, he had a lot of work to do to sort of like reset and say, okay, we're going to move into the future. We've got to work together really differently. And stepping into the role of CEO at Oiselle, the team had been through just a lot through the pandemic, a lot through a change in control. And so I would like to think I did at least half of the job, half of the good job that he did at Nuun here at Oiselle. I'm trying to establish that kind of trust early on to help us get through, the next stages and hurdles, because that always happens.